Thanks for following the link and joining us back for a more real talk conversation without the guidelines and constraints of keeping it within a certain time period. Because when you get forensic interviewers together, we could talk for days about the thing we love, which is developing the field, right? We really want the field to move into a direction that is beneficial for not only the kids and families we're serving, but our community and our teams. So let's keep talking about onboarding. We mentioned a little bit of some Cliff Note tools to implement or things to consider when you're onboarding. But if you're a CAC director and you don't have onboarding as part of your programming or have thought about it, but you want to, what are some strategies that you guys have used when you started building that part of the program in regards to onboarding? What were maybe the first things you considered or things that you looked at to start building onboarding inside the development process for interviewers? And Julie, I'll kick it to you to kick us off. And then we're gonna go super casual. So if it goes 800 directions, we're gonna go with it.
So I really think that we need to rely on Heather and Liz contextually for building this kind of stuff in CACs, but I can talk about it as a contract interviewer in a child forensic interview capacity, but then also as a mentor for CACs, because I think that's important, because I've not been responsible for building onboarding, but I've been a part of those plans for onboarding. And so one of the things that I think is important is figuring out what mentorship looks like. And how do we create mentorship for onboarding for people without creating mini-me's? So I know that we all see it. If, I'm working under Liz and, I just think she's the best because she's the one that's teaching me and she's my mentor. I all of a sudden say everything just the way Liz does. And I do everything just the way Liz does. And it may not be the most effectual way for me to do it. And so part of it, I think, is making sure that as we set people up who are a part of that, whether it's mentorship or supervision or whatever it is, people that are guiding the newbies in the onboarding process, is also making sure that we enlighten them so that they understand this purpose-driven approach for things, and they don't just say, do as I say, do it just like I do it. I know that Heather and I have had these conversations before, that words and the way that we say things, Liz and I have certainly had these conversations a lot. And it's that not just creating mini-me's, but being really thoughtful around that piece. So mentorship. And then also just really thinking about, in this onboarding process, what are the steps for continual improvement and education? I know that all of you are in the same place. I'm still striving to do the best that I can every time I go into the interview room. We all know there's not a perfect interview, but I think sometimes new people are coming in. It's like, when did I achieve it? And how do you say to the new person, you don't? This is going to be your lifelong goal, is to always be the best that you can be. So there are so many other things to say. So instead of me doing all the talking, I'm going to flip it back to you, to Christina, to invite them to speak. But
yeah, I love that you mentioned like not creating mini-me's, because there's always that conversation of like the art and the science. And when you come back from your initial protocol training, you're so like, oh my gosh, I have to stay inside the science or I'm gonna mess up. And we don't cultivate those soft skills for interviewers to like lean into who they are as an individual, because we know being genuine and being a human in an interview is going to make you a strong interviewer. But if you're going back to a program that doesn't know that's important to give them the freedom to do, you're actually, you might be creating a robot and a non-human, which kids don't respond to those. So yeah, it's hard. There's so many different buckets of onboarding that have the potential to be developed and cultivated, that I'm hopeful after the series that folks can think about it in a different way. So thinking about the programming part of it, Liz and Heather, you guys have built programming around this specific thing. Where did you guys start? Like, what was the first thing you thought of? And I'll let you fight over who goes first.
I mean, I can jump in. I mean, I started 32 years ago and well, 30 when we opened our CAC as the first interviewer. And we now have, I always have to look, we have 11 across the state of Wisconsin and 7 CACs. And so I've followed it through that entire process. And it took a lot of strong advocacy on my part, really, and then buy-in from my director to develop the role. It took, it was about 15 years in when I said, we need somebody to supervise because I don't have the power, even as the senior interviewer, so that I advocated to develop my own role and sort of made it up as I went along. And then really got connected with a lot of very smart people over the years and went to a lot of conferences and really developed it. But it came out of the concern of one of our interviewers who we thought, and we were doing peer review, we were doing weekly peer review as people joined the team. One interviewer that wasn't doing such a great job, and there was really nobody to say, you can't do that way anymore. And I didn't really have the power. So, now I do. But we're in the process right now of onboarding 3 people at different stages and 2 more upcoming. So we're doing a lot of different things, and I'm finally having to hand off some of that to one of my senior, more senior interviewers. And we do, and I could, of course, go on for hours about this in the process. But one of the things that I do also is I assign these new interviewers, once they're doing interviews on their own, a mentor. So they get, it's kind of their phone a friend. And in addition to me watching a couple of interviews a month when they're on their own, I also alternate with the more experienced interviewer. And that way it's not like talking to the supervisor or the manager. And they do one of 2 things. They either watch an interview that the newer person has done and give feedback, or with one of my people, I found that she had not seen enough really good interviews. So the experienced interviewer is actually showing hers and then talking through her thought process and what she's doing. And the one other thing I'll say too that I think is really difficult in this field when we're looked at as the experts, and hopefully we are, is really helping interviewers develop, I always say, confident yet humble. And that's something that I really work on with people as a new interviewer, is how do you make somebody feel confident in what they're doing when they're new, but yet humble, to not come across as, well, I've been here 6 months and I know it all, so something that I'm always working on.
Yeah, that's a whole other conversation of onboarding, is like the reality that if you're a new interviewer, and let's say you're the first interviewer back in your community, and you're the only one with this like developed skill set that nobody else has, you're automatically put on a pedestal of being an expert, but you're brand new. And so like, how do you be humble when your team is looking at you as like, you're the expert, you need to do the best that you can do? And it's a fine line, and it's very tricky. And Heather, you and I were talking about this, of like, we don't do a really good job of onboarding our new interviewers in regards to the relationship with our team, right? And that alignment with our team. I mean, we can train interviewers all day about a protocol, but are we training them on how they're engaging with their team during the break, or helping them understand what's happening in an interview? Or how do you train an interviewer to maybe stand up to questions from the team that aren't appropriate? And there's like so many different things to think about, that it's not just interviewing skills that our new interviewers need. So Heather, what kind of stuff have you guys seen in Utah that has been helpful to include?
So I think I probably take a more pragmatic approach that's pretty concrete. So I'm going to talk about some specific activities maybe instead of more theoretical or pieces. And I believe that meet people where they are, like, absolutely capitalize on their strengths, help them build confidence, help them be their own person, help them relate to the team, help them relate to kiddos while still adhering to, best practices and those kinds of things. But I think some very specific things. We talk a lot about, as interviewers, being intentional, thinking about what we're going to ask, how we're going to say it, being able to articulate why we did it the way that we did, being able to defend it later on. I think as we're onboarding them, we need to be just as intentional and have a little bit of a roadmap for them, because when they're brand new interviewers, there's, the world is your oyster. It's so big and overwhelming, and you're not even quite sure which parts to start with first. So a couple of concrete things that I've seen to be very, very helpful. Julie mentioned this early on, and I echo it 1,000,000%. I think one of the best tools interviewers can develop early on that will serve them well throughout their life as an interviewer, and Christina, you referred to it as a lifestyle, which I love, is being able to, in the moment, absolutely code and know what your question types are. You can so easily do that via transcripts. You can do that by email. I mean, it's not a labor-intensive, time-intensive thing. You can do it in the moment. There are lots of ways to build that in. So I would say that that has to be a very early on practice with somebody who can help them, obviously, with the accuracy and talking through some of those things. The other thing that I would say is that when interviewers, new or experienced, call me and they say, this happened in an interview, what should I do? What could I do? What would you do next time? I always ask them, well, what did you do? What do you want to do? What is your plan? Because I want to know what feels comfortable for them. I don't want a mini me. So I want to hear what their brain is saying about what makes the most sense and then help them through that. I see my role really as a coach to help them, boost them up when they need it, maybe help with humility a little bit when they need that too. But really coach them. What fits for you, and how can we make sure, that fits within the world of FI that we do, is the other thing. And then the last thing I would say is when I'm working on the coaching piece, whether it's through peer review or talking them through their interviews, I always end the conversation with, what are 3 things that you want to try to implement going forward in future interviews? If they can't come up with any, I can usually help them identify, but then we check in. That's sort of our baseline next time we chat, how that went, how that's working for them. Have they mastered those things more? And now next time we're going to build 3 more things into it, something like that. So some pretty concrete kind of activities around it.
Yeah, and I know we're talking about really formalized programs that have taken a lot of time and effort to put into place, that isn't easy to do and doesn't happen overnight, right? And so maybe some CAC leaders are hearing this and they're like, oh, that's a whole project I cannot undertake. So let's talk about some of the barriers to creating the onboarding process. What are some things you guys are seeing in the field as to maybe some reasonings why people can't onboard or haven't even started onboarding?
I have to say that and there are many, but even as an experienced interviewer, and I've been at this for many, many years, even as I'm listening to Julie and Heather talk, and even last week, it's like my brain is just popping, like, oh my gosh. And so I empathize with people that feel like this is huge, because it is. And we have a very big, well-developed program, and I have a lot of resources around me and very smart people. And I'm still, so it's not only do you never do a perfect interview, but you never have a perfect program. Always things to learn, right? But I mean, definitely, I see the barriers as being, and we talked about this a little earlier, time and money. How do you, how do you do that? So I think, and I think using the research to, what's the word, to inform what you're telling people, that you got to do it. You've got to do it. And whether it's talking to foundations or funders or upper management or whoever that is, to try and help do that. And I realize in rural areas and such, that's very difficult, maybe teaming with other CACs something like that, because, you know, I think the frustrating part is that we can say we don't have the time or the money, and that's probably true. I mean, I don't doubt it, but that doesn't make it any less necessary. And you know, when I hear people say, well, I need this, that, or the other thing in my forensic interview, well, that's great, but the kid can't do that. So in some ways, I almost feel that way about this. So I don't know what the answer is, but you know, we all got to work together.
Julie, you're inside a lot of CACs quite often. And so what are you seeing or hearing from centers in regards to onboarding?
It's an interesting thing. I was just thinking about, as Liz was talking, some of the conversations I had last week in Huntsville. There were some really passionate forensic interviewers who are just desperately seeking somebody to have conversations about their interviews, because they don't have those people. They don't have this infrastructure that Liz and Heather were talking about. And I was even just trying to problem solve. You know, we're standing in hallways and like, who can I connect you with? You know, who's in your region? What can we do in terms of peer review? Or who are some phone numbers that I can send in your direction? And what are your laws in your jurisdiction about sharing information? And just some of those quick things, because we are a small community. I mean, there are a lot of us, but we're a small dysfunctional family of forensic interviewers across the country. We tend to know each other and reach out and support each other. But the thing that strikes me, and we've talked about this a lot in the field of CACs, is that there isn't really, in most organizations, there isn't upward mobility for forensic interviewers. So if you stick around a long time, you either have a pretty good funding structure that you can get pay increases to continue to do this job, or you've got a life that allows you to sustain it at not very high pay, which is possible for some people. But for a lot of forensic interviewers in small communities, they're moving into director positions, and then they're onboarding somebody. And so when we think about that, they're learning a whole new skill set. They're trying to figure out all of those things. They don't really have the bandwidth. And this is probably where their passion is, right? I love being in the room with kids. That's what I hear from directors all the time. I want to stay. I got to keep in the room. I got to stay there. So they've got to figure out funding and all that kind of stuff, and meeting with their boards and doing all that stuff. They don't have time to supervise, and they certainly don't have time to keep up with the research that Liz was just talking about. So what I am seeing, to your point, Christina, is that the passion is there, the idea is there, the desire to support this new person is there, but the bandwidth is not there, the updated stuff isn't there. I mean, it's not a system that is sustainable. And so now you've got this person who might have a really good leader and a really good supervisor, but there's this whole gap. And so they're having to make it up. And I think Liz and Heather, and you too, Christina, but I think we are all in this position when we train. They're the people that line up at the end of a presentation, right? Wouldn't you say that, ladies? Like, they're the ones that have all the questions, because there just isn't another space for them to do that work. And, you know, God love them. I mean, thank God that their director finds the money to get them to these conferences to do this stuff, but that's not the best way to move them forward. So I think that is a big barrier, because they are passionate and they want to do the right thing. But by the time they come to us, the yuck has already happened. You know, I had this case 3 months ago and I really want to talk to you about it. And there isn't, I don't have an answer for that. I wish I had an answer for that, but it is a huge barrier. So it's skill set. It's, you know, even if the passion is there, it's a lack of being updated. It's all of those things. And I think that peer review attempts to meet that. But I think all of you that met and had that really detailed conversation about what does ongoing training look like is important, because we're not meeting the need. And the way that we're doing it right now isn't tapping into that piece. So I'm looking forward to the way that we're going to evolve to try to get into that ongoing niche for people.
Yeah. And Heather, coming from a chapter lens, you probably get a lot of these TA requests from centers. And so what could be some, you know, resources or, I don't want to say tips, but just things that centers can do if they don't feel like they can build full programming? What's out there as a chapter capacity?
Thank you for mentioning that. I definitely wanted to fit that into the conversation. I mean, I am lucky enough to be able to work for the chapter. We have 25 CACs in Utah, and help all of our forensic interviewers, across the state with all of these issues. But that was just 5 years ago. And that was just an idea that we had because we were trying to address the very things that we've been talking about. So I would say, I would really challenge states to look at, things at the chapter level and how the chapter can develop resources to help. We all have regional CACs that may be able to build and bolster some of these things to help individual centers that may not have resources. So in our state, we have me, and I can help with all things around FIs statewide, but I have tried to develop regional experts, because it's a big state for one person to cover. And some of us would like to retire someday potentially and pass the torch. So we need to be thinking about how we leave this place better than we found it, and let these things live on. So that's always something, if anybody's interested in exploring, a chapter resource, definitely reach out to me and I can help you with lots of logistics behind that. But I would say to Julie's point too, we are so fortunate to be part of this great, big, dysfunctional family that is beyond generous.
Mm-hmm.
All of us share and share and share and don't want to recreate things. And we all learn by trial and error, and what maybe didn't work for me may work for Liz, and all of those things. So I would also encourage people that if they need to find a connection, just reach out.
Mm-hmm.
No one's going to tell you no. You can start your own little listserv or your own little consultation group of people to log on. Here in my state, I do a consultation call online for all FIs, and they can come if they want. They don't have to come. I mean, a lot of people show up and we never have a, quiet moment about things that people don't have to talk about what happened in the last month in their world of FI, but you can start that informally. You don't need a chapter leader to do that. You can reach out to a couple of counterparts and just say, hey, do this. I mean, I know regionals are looking at that. Obviously, NCAC is revamping a lot of what they're doing, but just ask. I mean, chances are there are people that can help you, feel more confident and feel more supported moving forward.
Well, I would imagine that a lot of the programming that exists in CACs around interviewing spawned out of a passionate person who was like, this is how I want to operate as an individual in my center. So they advocated for themselves to get more funding or whatever support, or they connected with someone else who had that same spark that they did, and they just made things happen. Which, if you think about the world of just industries, like that's very rare that you can build things out of people that just having sparks. And I love that there are so many passionate interviewers. And so I always, I have an interviewing friend, Michelle, and we always talk about finding your person and just being able to have somebody in your corner, whether, let's say it's not inside your center, but just somebody else that you can talk to, decompress with, bounce ideas off of. That really rejuvenates folks who might be in centers that don't have a lot of support from leadership. Because I would tend to say, and I don't have the research to support this theory, but I would imagine a lot of interviewers don't stick around because of the lack of support inside their programming for them to sustain for a long period of time. I would love to see that be a thing, like if there is research around that. But how do we not only empower the individual interviewer to be the advocate, but also leadership? How do we empower leadership from the top-down approach too? And I don't have the answer for that. That's a whole industry shift. Sorry, Liz, did you want to add anything?
No.
Okay.
Christina, can I just say one more thing? I just want to say just don't be afraid to reach out, because even as alleged experts, if I had a nickel for every time I emailed or called Julie or you or Linda or somebody and said, hey, can you check me on this? I'm not sure about this, or I've been laying awake all night wondering if it should be this word or this word in a question. Can you help me be the tiebreaker? I mean, we do that all the time with each other. We're not afraid to laugh at ourselves or kind of give each other a hard time about what we're doing, but that spirit of generosity, keeping each other in check and really lifting each other up and wanting the best for each other, I think is one of the greatest gifts that this field really has given over the last couple of decades. So I would just encourage new people to find your person or persons, and hopefully you'll have 30 years of bliss like all of us have had.
Yeah, unfortunately, other than not knowing what all those ingredients are for that magical recipe, other than you just know it when you have it. But I think cultivating the field is important, and onboarding is part of that process. So because we've all been around for a while, what would be, I kind of want to end on this question because I think it could be of value for new interviewers, whether they're the interviewer or even CAC leadership. What's one thing you wish you would have either been told about the position that you were about to take as a forensic interviewer, or one thing that you wish you would have been educated about, right, through onboarding that you think other people should know about? So this is where we're going to impart our wisdom for other folks. Liz, I know there's probably lots of things we can think about. Like, I wish someone would have told me exactly what I was getting into, right? But Liz, what would be one thing you wish you would have known when you started?
Boy, that's really tough. I think, I don't know if it's what I would have known. I wished I'd have had people at the beginning to really mentor me, and there wasn't anybody. I mean, there were a few people, and, and I picked it up along the way, thank goodness. But, having having your person, I think is really important. And then somebody to help me with my confidence, because I think there just wasn't anything back then, really. I mean, not much. And have that person in my corner to just help me build my confidence. So I think teaching people to find that person or be that person for somebody, I think is really important.
I love the confidence piece because interviewers are such, we're under a microscope from every angle. And we all probably dealt with imposter syndrome every other week of like, this is not what I should be doing. And just having someone to kind of encourage, I think, is a good piece that we forget about in onboarding, because we think so much about skill set that we don't, like, we're human too, that need some strength building and lifting in that way. So I love confidence. That's good. All right, Heather, what do you wish you would have known?
I would say there are lots, but first and foremost, show yourself some grace and don't feel pressure to make the case. There's so much pressure on our shoulders, on your shoulders. Know that you're one piece of the investigation, just like we train, and we're going to help you get there. So just trust the process. Don't attach too much to the outcome, because beautiful interview or not, sometimes cases just don't go the way that we hope. Take a little bit of pressure off. Remind yourself that you don't have to make or break this. Just rely on the training, trust the process, get your person to help you through or your team to support you, but just show yourself a little bit of grace. Yeah, I love that. How do you define success, right? And maybe figuring that out on your own terms rather than telling your team telling you or your center telling you what a successful interview looks like, I think will allow you to kind of stick with it for a long period of time. Good. All right, Julie, what do you wish you would have been told or knew? Or
It's funny, Christina, because you started talking about it, and this was the note that I had made for myself. So we are in one of the few professions that gets evaluated every single time we do our jobs. And multiple people are evaluating us. Our team is evaluating us. The court system is going to evaluate us. And so we put an immense amount of pressure on what it is that we do. And so this really falls in line with what both of these fabulous women have said and what you were saying, Christina, that there's all this pressure and there's all this stuff. And I wish somebody had told me before I had to learn the hard way that it's not about me. Because in order to have that confidence that Liz was talking about, in order to do all those things that Heather was talking about, I think you've got to look in the mirror and go, I am all that. Like I'm good at my job and I can do this. And we create this kind of false sense of confidence because we're not doing it the way Liz talked about, and we're not doing all these things that Heather said and understanding all of it. And it becomes about us, our success or whatever. And I just wish that somebody had said, it's not about you, but it's about how you choose to hold space for the person in front of you who's doing the work. And they don't have to remember you. They don't have to even know who you are when you see them on the street. It's so not about you that if a child walks out of this room and they never remember you, you've done your job really, really well. And I wish that had been told to me, because I think it would have been easier than like, make an impression to everybody, including the child. Like, and that I think has been very humbling. So to the point that you made earlier too, Liz, about confident but humble, how beautiful that would have been. But you don't know that when you're young. I think when I started when I was 24, what did I know? Humble. That's a totally different, define it very differently when you're 24 than when you've been knocked around a little bit and whatever. But holding space, I think, for people and letting them do the work and and honoring that they are choosing us. And so if we can create that space to allow them to do that, that's what I try to tell newer people, because then it feels like you go to bed and you go, okay, I did that today.
Yeah.
I may have asked a lot of crappy questions, but I did that today. I held space for people today. So
yeah, I love that reframing. And so these things that we've experienced can easily be built into how you onboard new interviewers, right? So really giving them the space to define what success looks like, or the purpose of them being in that room, or how do you help them build confidence through onboarding them. All of those things will help build the interviewers. I know for me, I wish someone would have really been real with me about how the job would affect me in regards to secondary traumatic stress. And, until you wake up one day and go, oh, these thoughts I have are not normal. But it would have been nice to have known that was potentially could be a thing that happened. And what the resources I had were for when I was starting to have those feelings and thoughts would have been nice. I think a lot of times policies and programming get developed out of like things that happen that shouldn't have happened in the first place, whether it was a bad interview or someone decided to quit because they weren't being supported. So instead of potentially being in that situation as a program, just build it in already. Don't wait for something bad to happen. So I think what I'd like to do is for us to go around and just give one takeaway. If you were telling a CAC leader, because I think interviewers who have passion are going to advocate all day about what they need. So let's make this a takeaway for the CAC leaders. What's one thing that we want CAC leaders to know about onboarding interviewers? And this could just be a word or an activity or a practice, but one thing that they could start tomorrow that doesn't take a lot of work for them to move in that direction. And Heather, we'll start with you.
I would say support your people and your forensic interviewer. And if you're not sure how, there are plenty of resources that you can tap into to just get some ideas.
Great, I love it. All right, Julie.
This is going to be a part you're going to have to edit. I got to think for a second.
I can toss it to Liz.
Toss it to Liz.
Okay. Yeah, it's tough because there is a long list. And I don't know if it's something you can do, but here, the thing that really has been in the forefront of my mind and training that I'm doing and people that I'm talking to is remember, these are children. They're not victims that happen to be kids. Whatever we do from the second they walk in that door till the second they walk out, whether it's the interview or whatever it is, we need to treat them like we would treat any other child in our life. And I think that would change so much, if everybody heeded that piece of advice, if you will.
I love it. All right, Julie, take us home.
So I think we need to remember that forensic interviewing is really sort of the lifeblood of the CAC movement. I mean, it's the reason why we're all there, coming together to provide that resource to kick off the investigation and then all of the follow-up services. And so to that end, that forensic interviewing program needs to be supported, like Heather said, and all the things that Liz is saying. But in order to have a good program, those individuals are listening to these stories every day, and the rest of the folks in the CAC typically are not. And so I think, as I talked about, if I wish I knew just to hold space, that maybe our leaders need to hold space for those forensic interviewers and figure out a way, however that looks, to know that as the lifeblood of what it is that the center is doing, that we need to really think about that so that there can be some longevity.
Yeah, I love it. I think our overarching message is do something, don't do nothing. And if you feel like you're in a situation for lack of time or energy or resources, know that you do have access to support to do something. And the chapters are there to figure out what that is. Regionals are there to help you build programming. Your neighboring CAC is there to help you build programming. And so just know there's a lot of resources available. I want to thank each one of you individually for joining me for this conversation. We could probably have a year-long series of interviewing thoughts and topic discussions because we're all very involved in wanting to see interviewing develop over the course of the CAC movement. So thank you, Julie. Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Liz, for joining me. And if folks want to find out more, maybe about your programming or your resources, I'll let you guys kind of drop in where to find me, and we'll end with that. So Heather, where can folks find you?
Probably the easiest way would be just to email me directly here. We're not prolific in the social media world here on our end. So my email address is Heather Stewart. It's STEWART @agutah.gov.
Great, thanks. And Liz, where's the best place for folks to get in contact with you?
I would say email as well. So it's Gilardi, GHILARDI @childrenswi.org.
Great. And Julie, I would say, where can people find you? But I'm pretty sure everyone knows where to find Julie.
It does seem like it's relatively easy to find me, but to find me, probably the easiest way is if you take my last name and take the N off, KENNISTO @FV as in Victor, T as in Thomas, C.edu, FVTC. So Kennisto @FVTC.edu. Christina, thank you for bringing us together.
Yeah,
Yes, thank you.
Fun. We'll keep talking when we see each other, and we'll change the movement of interviewing for sure. So thank you all. Thank you for watching us. And if you need any help or resources, stay tuned for the next 2 weeks and have a great one.